in that system. So if anybody came in, whether it was the vendor, whether it was the department manager, whether it was our auditors, when they went in to look at that, it was a complete A to Z view. They saw all communication, all email communication, every document the vendor sent in, all responses from the manager. It was all in one place, so you didn't have to bounce around all these different systems. So it was a really great system.
All right. So what I'm hearing is that you first launched a pilot project to test the new system.
Yes.
Okay. Would you be able to quantify the improvement or the amazing results that you saw as a result of this new system?
Well, there was definitely a lot more efficiency as far as follow up, and we were able to get documents and in on time because we were able to monitor everything more closely.
Yeah.
There was a lot more automation. Therefore, it didn't need me to go. I have 1,000 vendors, and every single day I have to look at each and every vendor for progress. Right? There's an automated way, so it was way more efficient of everybody's time, uh, which was amazing. And then again, just it was a great experience for the vendor. They were able to know exactly what we were asking for and get us what we needed in a much more timely fashion versus the back and forth. What do you need? I have this document. Is that the document you wanted? Or, there was a lot of back and forth prior.
Yeah. So would you be able to maybe say by how much the efficiency increased?
Oh, I would say probably at least 75% in improvement as far as efficiency.
Oh, that's great. So yeah,
Yeah.
we can use that. So we okay, great. That's great. All right. And then did you have to conduct because you were first testing the pilot project yourself, right? So
Yes.
now that the system there's a new system in place and people have no idea how to go about it. Did you have to conduct
Yep.
any training to
Yes.
onboard? Did you create any manuals? How did you onboard the system basically?
So I created all the training manuals, both for vendors as well as internal employees. And there was different levels, right? So there was the vendor manager manual. Then there was a manual for the person completing the work as far as in the department. But then there was somebody in the department that had to review that work and approve it. So there was a manual for them as well. So there's three different manuals. I did training. I did in-person training as a group. I did one-on-one in-person training. I did WebEx trainings as a group as well as individual based on what people's needs were.
All right. How many people would you say that you trained?
I trained, well, I'd say about 100 people in total in the bank for this
All
particular job.
that's great. That's amazing. And the other thing that I was gonna ask, so did you have to work with the IT team to
Yes.
implement this new system?
Absolutely. So
Because this
worked
is
with the
hard,
IT
right?
team we had a whole project plan, and not only did I test the system, I was also the project manager for this project. So I put together the timeline of the project. So from the date that we signed that we were going to do a pilot of this, to all the way, for IT to implement into our test system, the timeline of that, who was going to do that, the responsibilities and schedule of everybody involved. I had weekly meetings with IT, my manager, as well as the CEO to keep them up to date on our progress and to show them what the differences were between the two systems, our current system and the new one we were going to show them the better efficiencies and the better flow. And then once we finished all of our testing and we were ready to go, I went and coordinated that and got all the appropriate sign-offs on all the different stakeholders as well as IT, and then coordinated that to get implemented into our production site on the weekend, and then came
All
in on the weekend and tested it to make sure nothing broke in that time frame. And then on the Monday morning, it was open for business.
Alright. Can you also, I have a bunch of questions about the whatever you just said. So the timeline, what was the timeline and were you able to deliver the project on time?
Oh yes, I've always delivered I have not had any project that I didn't deliver on time.
All right.
So and on budget, which is nice. So yeah, the first thing that I do in a project is I sit down with all the stakeholders involved and I say what are the needs and what is the
Mhm.
timeline, and what is the I would like to have and what I absolutely must have, right? So everybody wants it tomorrow. I'd like to have this ready tomorrow, but in reality, I must have this available by January 1st, right? So we
Yeah.
settle on the final deadline date, and then we work backwards and figuring out, okay, in order to meet this deadline, these things need to happen. Now, in what order do they need to happen and what resources do we need to have? And then I put that all together and I present that to the team and make sure all the stakeholders are on board. I will change it as they change their mind. Oh, well, we need it sooner than that, or we need it later than that, or whatever. I would update it as they needed it, and then we would kick off we'd have an official kickoff of the project, and then I would
Mhm.
manage that timeline to make sure everybody was doing what they needed to do. And again, those weekly meetings to make sure everybody understood what their roles were and they would be able to express any challenges they're having so that I could step in and work with whomever I needed to get those resolved, whether that was IT, the vendor, other stakeholders to get some decisions made. And I would kind of push that along to get that resolved.
All right. And what was the timeline for this particular project?
This particular project, we had about I'm trying to remember exactly. I think it was a little bit less than 10 months to complete. And the reason why it was so long was because for most of that, I didn't have a manager. I was the only person in the department. So I couldn't do the project and maintain the daily work
Yeah.
when it was just me. So then when they
Mhm.
hired a manager, we were able to complete that project pretty quickly.
All right. And I'm wondering, so whose idea was this to replace the system? Were you the one who identified all the issues with the existing system and, educated the leadership that we need this to change? Who came up with this?
Well, I think everybody knew there was a problem.
Okay.
And I believe that the project to find, it's a whole project to even vet out different vendors to use. And so that happened prior to me moving over to vendor management. But the reason why I was able to be a part of this project was because the budget was finally approved to do this project. I think the project was already on the books for a few years, but the budget was never approved. So once it was approved, I was already over there and was able to move forward.
All right. And what was the budget for this?
Uh, the budget, oh man, you're stretching my knowledge here as far as like what I remember. I it was over $1 million.
Oh, okay. Because that helps. You put in the resume, it's a multi-million dollar, it's a $1 million project. So, it makes it look
Sure,
impressive. That's why I'm asking for all the details.
absolutely. Hey, whatever you want, I'll ask. I'll answer for sure. You're the
Okay.
expert here.
Okay, great. So, and then another bullet is about creating and updating training documentation. So, I'm wondering it was about the system, or was there other document training happening?
No, it was about the system and what the expectations were for each department and what everybody's role was. We kind of redefined different roles, and so we needed to address that in our training to say, okay, it used to just be one person that took on the whole entire thing for your department, and now we've split it into two. Explain the roles and responsibilities of everybody and who those were assigned to, and then walked them through what that looked like.
All right. And so, was there no training infrastructure in place before, or was
No,
there no? So you
not
actually
in vendor management.
All right. So, okay. So, not only did you implement a new system, but because, this is something separate that, you built up a training infrastructure, you developed all the material and stuff. So,
Correct.
now any future training sessions, they'll obviously be using that. Okay. Great.
Yeah, and I did conduct all the training myself.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. And you said you've trained over 100 people. And
Yeah, it was
were these
slightly over 100.
okay? Were these weekly training or monthly?
Uh, so the plan was to do quarterly training, but once we implemented, I left shortly after that. So for the vendor management piece of this, it was just the initial training of the system and the new process.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. I understand. Okay, so the other big thing in vendor management, and that was actually one of the first things that you mentioned, was making sure, because it's a federally regulated industry, is
Yes,
that all regulatory standards are met. How do you, and you like you said, over 1,000 vendors. So how do you ensure that regulatory compliance, like did you identify any instances with any vendors or clients when there was non-compliance and you had to work with them to, fix things?
absolutely. Yes,
To
so what we did was we rated all of our vendors critical, high, medium, and low. So
oh,
if it was a vendor that supplied our paper for our copier, yeah, they were a low vendor. So they had a lot less um,
yeah.
scrutiny to them, right? But our IT vendors, somebody that would have access to our systems, to our computers, to our data, um, those were critical, right? So those they had to meet our regulatory with our federal regulations. So
Mm-hmm.
for each criticality of the vendor, we had a different set of documents required. Critical needing the most and the low vendors needing the least. And so by obtaining those documents from the vendors and then our management, each department, whoever utilized that vendor, would review those documents and they were responsible for making sure they were in compliance with us. And then when they weren't, because there were several times that, we would use a small mom and pop shop for our to meet our small business requirements, and they wouldn't have the money or the resources to do all the documents that we would need. So there were some workarounds to that. We created new documents that the vendor would then sign off on, and we would work closely with them and make sure that it was in compliance federally. We would work with our federal auditors and make sure that the documents that we created were going to be sufficient to meet our audits, and then making sure that our vendors supplied them.
All right. And when you took over, what was the state of regulatory compliance?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm just saying, when you took over the position of vendor management, what was the state of regulatory compliance within the department or with vendors? I'm just
For the
trying to,
vendors, yeah.
yeah, I'm just trying to assess what was the impact of your actions specifically.
Sure. I would say that hmm, I would say that the impact of me being in that job was the biggest thing was implementing that new system,
Okay.
because a lot of things we didn't know were broken until we were able to have an automated way of monitoring everything. We wouldn't know until we got hit with an audit that like these 200 things were we got dinged on and we had to go fix. Um, we Our most recent audit prior to me leaving had probably 45% less um, dings or notations of problems. And that was due to having an amazing system and knowing how to manage that system. So
That's
when we realized, oh, this company's out of compliance, we knew that right away because it was automated. and we were alerted right away, wait a second, we haven't gotten these documents, they're out of compliance. So we were able to address that with the vendor quickly and get those documents or sever ties with them, and showing the federal government like we are monitoring and we are regulating what we're doing, and we're actually on top of it now.
All right, all right.
And
Okay, great.
we anticipated a 90 plus percent um, improvement on our audits within a year and a half of the implementation of this new system. I didn't stay that long, so I can't tell you if it did that, but I can tell you that it definitely, in the short time that I was there after it was implemented, there was vast improvement in correspondence with the vendors, with the managers that dealt with the system, as well as our internal auditors that were doing audits at that time.
So which you said was 45% less notations and issues
Yes.
raised in the audits. Was this
Correct.
in the internal audits or was this in it was a federal audit, right?
On that one was the federal, yes.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so because it's such a huge project, and because you're dealing with vendors who like you said, one vendor might be for this one business unit, and one is providing for another one. So you're actually dealing with all these, like you said, business units, and there's so many
Correct.
internal teams. How did you intro? I can only imagine so many communication and other
Hmm.
issues, right? Which are very critical to
Absolutely.
project management. And I really want to highlight that. So, how did you ensure smooth relations between these internal teams and the vendors and the clients? So, all these really multiple stakeholders.
Well, I think the most important thing is clear and honest communication. And
Yeah,
when you're clear and honest, everybody understands what the expectation is. And then the second thing to that is follow up and follow through. If I say in my email that I need something X, Y, and Z by this date, and that I'm going to follow up, it's clear that I'm expecting something of you, and then I actually have to follow up to make sure you've given it to me.
yeah,
And respect, right? I'm not going to send an email and saying you still haven't given this to me. Why are you dropping the ball? That would be very unprofessional, right? So it's about
yeah.
just making sure, like, hey, I'm sure you're really busy, but the deadline's in 2 days. I still haven't seen this. Just checking in, making it more conversational instead of a dictatorship, instead of me pointing my finger and shaking it saying, you haven't done what you said. It's more of a team effort. Hey, I'm in this with you. How can I help you get this accomplished? Right. And that's the approach that I try to take to it. Like, I'm not, even though I am in charge of making sure you do this, I'm your team member. I'm in it with you. How can I help you prioritize this to get this done? Right. And that's the way I approach it.
All right. Um, and so, were there? Can you maybe have an example of any such instance where you were able to avert disaster, or really basically fix something that was being caused by miscommunication, or there were problems between a business unit and a vendor? I'm just looking for examples, basically.
Sure. The first one that pops to my mind is right when I started the job. We were in the old system, and my manager that hired me, uh, like, quit 2 weeks after I started. So I was without a manager, and we
Yeah,
had just finished an audit, and there was a whole bunch of things that we needed to fix. And the manager that had just quit had told senior management in our board meetings that several things were done. And come to find out, most of those were not done. So when I would I would do the reports and send it to my CEO saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing. And he would be like, no, Bob said these were done. And no, they're not done, but I'm working on them. Right. And I was able to identify the gaps that uh, were
yeah,
communicated that they were done when they weren't, and then fix them right away, so that when the audits came back and we had a deadline to fix these things, when they came back to see if they were fixed, I was able to make sure they were, even though if I hadn't identified that if I would have just taken my old manager's word that these were done, we would have been in big trouble. It would have been a big problem. So by me reviewing what the entire audit was and making sure that I understood what was going on and what the resolution was, I was able to identify there was a lot of resolutions that weren't completed, and we were able to resolve them quickly.
Okay. And do you maybe remember by how much you had solved the problems by the time of the next audit?
So, in that's a good question. I mean, I know that between that audit and the next one, there was the 45% decrease as far as how many errors or things we got dinged on. Unfortunately, I think there was still some repeating problems that hadn't been addressed yet. But overall, I mean, there was a 45% decrease in issues.
So this is the same audit that we just talked about, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. No problem. And then just any issues between teams and vendors, like business units and vendors.
Oh, well, there's always some sort of problem between different team members or, between outside vendors and internal, different
Mm-hmm.
personalities. They clash. They don't communicate well. They don't follow through. So just reminding people that, in our weekly meetings, we would go over what the issues were, and then I would give suggestions on, well, if you weren't, you know, maybe have a lighter touch, not be so direct or harsh in your communication with them, and give them guidance on maybe how to get people working for them instead of against them. Um, is the best way to do that.
All right. Okay. So you don't, there aren't any particular examples of there being a very particular
Not
instance
in
where.
No, not in the vendor management role.
Okay, sure, no problem. And I was going to ask you about oversight and reporting, but then I think the new system, it did introduce because you said that, now that things were automated, there was a lot
Sure.
more oversight. You could see, okay, wow, this isn't being
Right.
done and this is done. All right.
And in the new
I just,
system, I created, when you were talking about reporting and stuff, in the new system,
Mhm.
I had to create from scratch all the reports that were going to be generated from that system. So I had to understand, what did the board members want to see? What did my executive team want to see? What did the different departments want to see? And build those within the system so that they would automatically generate. And then, as we were working with the different teams, they would say, "Oh, this report's great, but I don't need this, but I really need this, or I want these columns to be swapped." And so just working with them to tweak it to get exactly the report they needed. So then it was automated, and then it was kind of set. We didn't have to worry about it anymore.
Okay. So once those reports had to be written and, all
Correct.
right.
Yeah. I
Uh, so basically you were creating templates.
Yeah, so like I would actually do work with the report writing system. So I would actually build a report. Like I would say, I want this data to be the first column. I want the second data to be this column, and then I would do formulas within the the report. And then what would happen is I'd say, I want this report to kick off every single Monday. So then it would be automated. It would give all the data we needed every Monday. Um, Pulling from the data within the system. But I had to tell it, I want the customer name to be in this column. I want the customer number to be here. I want this number to be here. And then do some formulas to tell, oh, this is overdue by 10 days. This is overdue by 2 days. This is 5 days out, things like that.
All right. So this is all I have for the vendor management role. Is there anything else that you feel is missing?
Nope, I think we covered that pretty thoroughly.
Okay, great. And then the next one is division support from 2012 to 2018. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
The next experience was division support from 2012 to 2018.
Correct, yeah. And there were
Okay.
several roles you'll see here that I overlapped. So I did this role while also doing my vendor management role until I left.
Oh,
Because they
okay.
didn't have when I left this division support and went to vendor management, they did not have a replacement for me yet. So about 2 months before I left the bank, I trained a replacement for the division support position, but I continued both roles, right? So that's why it shows like through 18 because I did them both.
Okay, so I'll definitely be combining these two then because they were happening concurrently. Okay, so can you give me an overview? So wait, so you were already in division support. So would the vendor management role count as a promotion?
It actually was. It was a promotion. So I did get like a pay increase. It was a level increase as far as like what level I was at. So it was a promotion, but because they didn't have somebody to fill the old role, I just continued to maintain that while doing the new job.
All right. So can you give me an overview of what you were doing and what you were tasked with in the division support? What was the job title? Was it division support?
Yeah, division support was their job title. But what in actuality, what I was doing was project management. This is the really heart of when I did a lot of project management, where I would I did a lot of testing as well. Like I said, I was the top tier for all the ACH issues. I'm the only person in the bank at that time that tested any new updates to the ACH system. I tested it and implemented it, but I was also the project manager for all ACH, anything online like online banking related. So any updates to our online banking, ACH, wires, internal transfers, just seeing your statements, anything like that where we upgraded, I was in charge of during this time.